Welcome to the Storycraft Cafe. Come in, grab a cup of your favorite beverage, and get ready to join the storytelling conversation. Storycraft Cafe is brought to you by Dabble, the ultimate cloud-based fiction writing software. Here we're going to bring together storytellers from all walks to encourage and empower you to craft your best story.
Hello everyone, my name is Grace and I am the cafe manager over here at the Storycraft Cafe. I'm here to personally invite you to come check out the Storycraft Cafe if you haven't already been by. There is so much happening in the cafe this month. We are running live events with authors, doing group writing sprints, and talking a lot about the ins and outs of writing, the joys and the woes. If this sounds like fun, stop by for a cozy digital beverage at storycraft.cafe. That's STORYCRAFT.CAFE. I can't wait to see you all there.
Welcome to another week in the Storycraft Cafe. Boy, do we have a fantastic show for you today with author Hannah Mary McKinnon. Before we talk to Hannah, though, let's hear from Lou Diamond Phillips about why genre fiction is so important. Be sure to join us at storycraft.cafe and click on the upcoming events tab and look for a live event that you can join in on. All coming up in the month of June, we're going to be tackling character development. Lots of great stuff going on there at storycraft.cafe. Now let's hear from Lou.
Today's sci-fi, and you look at something like Stargate Universe, which, had, what was that wonderful, it was before Outlander, the wonderful Sean Connery, high noon sort of thing. Yeah, remember? That was pretty much high noon in space, So sci-fi is the modern day Western to a certain extent. And, even if it's, Mad Max or, that entire, Fury Road kind of futuristic steampunk aspect, and that influenced Yvonne's drawings as well. But the American Western, modern sci-fi, really to me boil down to they're the morality tales. They are the fables. They allow us to discuss in a very non-mundane setting, even a fantastical setting, the great questions of human character and human existence. What is bravery? What is courage? What is sacrifice? What is nobility? When you elevate all of those to the level of, royalty, of kings and queens and princesses, of soldiers, all of that, then I think that takes the reader to a place where you can discuss these very, very important, aspects of humanity that have existed, since the beginning of art, since the beginning of writing. And we're in a time right now where personally, I think we need to reflect on character. We need to reflect on integrity and what is right and what is wrong. And, you can go back to Aesop's fables and go, okay, that's the simplistic version of it. But, there is some of that DNA in this as well.
Today, I'm super excited to have one of my all-time favorite authors, my friend Hannah Mary McKinnon. Always a pleasure to catch up with you, Hannah, and your new book, Never Coming Home, is absolutely stunning. I know everyone's going to love this book. I know I did. And welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for the lovely introduction. That's so kind of you, Hank. Thank you for having me.
Well, absolutely. I look forward to chatting every time you've got a new book out. And how many books is this for you now? What is Never Coming Home?
This is book 6.
Book 6. Wow.
Yes.
Does it get easier, when you've got 6 books, your 6th book coming out, as opposed to that first one? It's familiar territory for sure, but every book's different and every launch is different, isn't it?
That's true. I mean, this is the third of my books that has launched during the pandemic, it's less prevalent perhaps now in certain areas. But it's less daunting from that sense. I mean, 2 years ago, it was very scary launching a book in the pandemic, and just the pandemic itself, of course.
Right.
So it's equally as exciting and nerve-wracking, but it is familiar territory. So I know what to expect in certain ways and not at all in others. You never know how the book's going to land. I mean, that you never know until it's out in the wild. So that part's always a bit scary.
Well, I didn't plan to talk about the pandemic, but since you brought it up, I do think it's worth talking about for just a minute. There are kind of two aspects to it. One is the writing of the book during a pandemic, and which has been kind of weird for everybody because as writers, we tend to work at home a lot of times and in an office by ourselves, and kind of lonesome work is familiar to us. But there's something weird that happens when the rest of the world is working from home as well, and it's a mental challenge to a lot of people. Have you experienced any of that?
I did honestly at the very beginning when COVID arrived in Canada, so to speak, or when we went into our first lockdown in the middle of March 2020. That was when I found it really, really difficult. I kept watching the news incessantly, because we're looking towards Europe predominantly, because that was almost like our crystal ball. What's going to be happening in 2 weeks here? Well, look to Europe and you'll see. So, and I have family here, so in Europe. So it was very daunting and scary. And in the end, I actually had to shut off the news because I wasn't getting anything done. So I limited myself to say half an hour a day, and that was my lot. And I was actually really productive. So never coming home, while this is the third release during the COVID years, as I shall now refer to it, the COVID years, it's actually the first book that I wrote entirely during the pandemic. So I plotted the book, wrote the book, and edited the book between 2020, middle of 2020 and early 2021. And out of all of my books so far, this is the weird thing, it was the smoothest to write. Not the easiest, because writing books isn't easy, and I wouldn't want anyone to think that it is. But it was the smoothest. It was the one that seemed to just flow. And I remember saying to my husband, Rob, I said to him, it's going really well, and the shoe's going to drop and everything's going to fall apart. And I kept expecting that to happen, and it didn't. So maybe that was, I don't know, the universe or karma or whatever, saying, it's been a crappy time. We'll give you this one, but don't expect it for the next 10.
Well, I'm so happy that it was a smooth experience for you, and I definitely want to kind of dig into some of your process in a minute. But the other side of the book business is you have to write a book, but then you have to sell that book.
Yes.
What has been your experience during the pandemic with selling books? Because the book industry has been interesting because we've seen, well, one, bookstores shutting down during lockdowns and things like that, but we've been able to order books online, and there have been some shipping issues and things like that, and there have been some supply chain issues with printed bound books, but ebooks and audiobooks have fared fairly well during this. What has been your experience, and what have you noticed with the shifting sands of the publishing industry?
I think if I take the first book that came out at the beginning of the pandemic, so that will be Sister Dear in 2020.
Yeah,
that one I think has stronger ebook sales, like you said. I think that's probably one of the strongest ones. And probably because the stores were closed, I think that was definitely a big factor. Honestly, it's my publisher's HarperCollins, and they are the ones who do all of the heavy lifting in terms of distribution and getting the book into all of the different sales channels in all of the different formats. And I really can't fault them. I know they've done an extraordinary amount of work to get the book out there. What I did see very early on, of which I was also a very active participant, was shifting promotional events online. So very, very early on in COVID, because I was already comfortable and reasonably well versed in the tech required to go online, I was very quickly participating in online events, and those have continued. And I hope that they will continue, because in terms of audience reach and geography, yes, there are technical limitations. Of course, your audience still needs to have the tech to get online. But if you take that out of the equation just for a second, if you go online, you have a much broader reach, and it's very convenient. So I'm certainly planning on continuing with online events even once the COVID years are over, because I think you reach so many people who, sure, you can do in-person events, but then geography
Right.
and physical limitations perhaps will prevent people from coming. So it's lovely. I think it's lovely. I mean, obviously the pandemic has been horrific and horrible, but if there is a silver lining somewhere to be found,
Yeah.
it's one of them is the fact that many people took this technological leap at the same time.
You're right.
So we've learned, many of us have learned, okay, so this is Zoom. How does that work? Or StreamYard, or whatever it may be.
Right.
So I can't say it's a level playing field, because again, it depends on the person, it depends on their circumstance, it depends on their access to tech and their ability to use it, of course. But it has brought many people together, I think, through technology. I mean, if you think about the pandemic, if this had happened, gosh, even 20 years ago or 30 years ago, there wouldn't have been the abundance of online content that we had now. So I've been very thankful that I've been able to play a part in that, and hopefully provide people some entertainment and light relief through the online events I've done.
Right. Well, and hopefully, when we're fully on the other side of this thing and life gets back to, as normal as life's going to get back to, maybe we can, embrace the live in-person appearances and also the online appearances, where you can still reach many people, but there's just no substitute for handshakes and hugs.
That's
and
right.
Signed books, when you're able to do that, for sure.
Agreed. Yeah. Maybe there'll be a hybrid, maybe there'll be, I can imagine, I think they're already doing them, events where they have in person with an online streaming component, which is fabulous.
Right. Absolutely. And another thing that you've, I guess you guys have been doing it for a couple of years now, you and Hank Philippi Ryan, another one of my favorite authors, do First Chapter Fun, which is a fantastic show that you guys do. And I pop in all the time on Instagram and lurk a bit there and listen to what you guys are doing. I love it so much. But how has, there's something that happens when you talk to other people, about the craft, and it's energizes you in a way. And that, that's one reason we do this podcast, is because there's no substitute for talking with other people that are in the trenches and doing the work. And, sometimes you glean a bit of knowledge that that you can file away in your toolkit, and sometimes it's just the motivation or the inspiration. How has doing that show affected your creative life as a writer?
Oh gosh, First Chapter Fun. So that was an off the cuff thing that started 2 years ago in March of 2020, when I suggested to a group of author friends that I read the first chapter of their book on Instagram and Facebook Live, because we were all scrambling because all of our events were being cancelled. And I thought, a few people would accept for me to do that. And it turned into 50. And then Hank came along and she said, how about we partner up and read twice a week instead of every day? Because every day was a bit much to do on an ongoing basis. And it just took off from there, and it's been 2 years, and it's been, first of all, when I first started it, it was to help give fellow authors content and promote their books. But it was also selfishly for me to get my head out of the pandemic, to be honest, because I was obsessing about it, and it was a brilliant distraction because I just didn't have time anymore. That half an hour even that I had limited myself to, I don't even think I used that anymore. So it was fantastic from that point of view. And in terms of on Facebook certainly, but also on Instagram, of building this community, because that's really what it's turned into, the First Chapter Fun family with the First Chapter Funsters, where people are regularly tuning in and commenting, and we're greeting people by their names, and it's just become this lovely half an hour bubble twice a week, Tuesday, Thursday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern time, where we get together. It's not in person, it is online. We can't see one another, that's true. But it's just become this lovely, almost like a safe haven, really, where we just talk about books. The plague does not get mentioned very often. Sometimes it slips in, but not often. It was designated to be a plague-free zone. And the connections I've made within the writing community, whether it's people who are watching, readers or authors, or their publishers, their publicists, their agents perhaps, it's just been absolutely lovely to be able to pay it forward, to be able to give back to this community, the writing community and reading community, that are both so incredibly generous. So it's been a lovely experience. Plus, I get to read first chapters and hear first chapters when Hank reads them all the time, which has also made me very aware of the importance of really nailing that first chapter. Right. So it's been very helpful for that too.
It's there really is no substitute for a great first chapter. You know, it's so funny. I was talking with Terry Brooks, the fantasy author, a little while ago, and we were talking about how just writing and publishing has changed over the decades. And he said when he wrote the first Shannara books in the 1970s, that you could get away with having a story that built for 8 or 10 chapters, and when you look back, not a whole lot really happens. It's kind of building up to an inciting incident, and now you really have to hit the ground running, and
yes.
You need to pull the reader in chapter 1. What have you learned about writing just from seeing the way other people have done it? Have you picked up anything that you have filed away in your writer toolkit?
I think it's exactly that. I think it's basically that if there's any information that isn't really necessary in the first chapter, take it out and make sure that at the end of the first chapter something happens already. Traditionally in thrillers, certainly when I first came to writing thrillers a number of years ago, the thinking, and it still is, that something big needs to happen at around about page 50. But I think equally so, something needs to happen in the first chapter, at the end of the first chapter, where the reader asks themselves, oh my, what happens next, and wants to turn the page. So, and I think also already on the first page, you need to have something that hooks the reader's interest, because sometimes with Twitter you get 280 characters, right. Which is not even a page, not even a paragraph. So you have to really, really hook the reader right from the beginning, page 1, end of chapter 1, and then moving forward. Certainly with my thrillers, I always try and have a mini cliffhanger at the end of each chapter. For example, somebody arriving somewhere or discovering somewhere, or perhaps finding the answer to a question, but which begs another question. So lots of those techniques where it's not just the flat ending of a chapter, because you basically want to eliminate any reason the reader might have to put the book down. Right. Right. So it's been very, very helpful, certainly seeing all of these first chapters, definitely.
Yeah. Your books, Never Coming Home is book 6 that you've published, as you mentioned. Where do you see yourself in the publishing landscape and genre wise? We have a bunch of genres, and then under those genres we have subgenres, and I think those are important for selling books. You need to know what part of the bookstore to send someone to if they're looking for a particular kind of story. But most people that I've met don't really think in those black and white terms of, I'm writing a domestic suspense thriller, and I know that I have to have this element, this element, this element, and certain tropes, and if you start looking at the way the publishing industry lays out, you get the impression that writers have a checklist of things that they go down, and that's just not the case for most people. But their writing does tend to kind of fall into certain categories, and that kind of determines where we sell your book. But if someone had never read one of your books, how would you describe the kinds of stories that you tell?
I would say it's in the crime fiction bucket, which is an awfully big bucket, but crime fiction, and it's predominantly stories about families and relationships within messed up relationships within those families. So I don't write police procedurals or private detectives, for example. I don't write cozy mysteries either. So it really would be, yes, it's general crime fiction where you take ordinary people and put them in extraordinary circumstances and then turn up the pressure. That's what I write about. It's people focused. It's rather than, I don't write gore. My books aren't gory, so they're not say hard boiled noir or anything like that. But it's really about families or relationships, husband wife, as in Never Coming Home. Could be father son in Her Secret Son, or sisters in Sister Dear. And that's what I like to write about, is everyday people, but in extraordinary circumstances, and then making stuff go really wrong for them. Oops. They're not real though, people. Nobody gets hurt. It's all good. They show up every day for work unharmed, I promise.
So I know that you, from our conversations in the past, you are a plotter. And I think you even mentioned earlier that, writing during the pandemic, that you plotted this book and then drafted and edited all during the pandemic. Have you always been a plotter, or did you kind of grow into that as you became a professional writer?
I'd say always a plotter. But the more I write, the more I've refined the process that works for me. So to be honest, when I outlined my first book, the rom-com, I didn't know what I was doing. I had no clue. I just thought, well, I better figure out what this story is going to be, kind of a chapter by chapter thing. I don't even know if I knew what an outline was, to be honest. I knew nothing about the craft. I just went for it, which is perhaps not the right way to do it, but it worked out in the end. But now I really have a process that serves me really well, because when I was first writing, I didn't have any deadlines. So I could take as much time as I pleased, really, because nobody was expecting anything. But now I have deadlines, and I'm never just working on one book. So right now I'm in the midst of Never Coming Home, about to come out, and promoting that. And I'm writing, so I'm editing the book for 2023, writing another one for 2023, and about to embark on the plot for 2024. And sometimes I might have a book club. A couple of weeks ago, I had a book club for last year's book. Wow. So I'm never just focused on yes, at a time, I'm focused on one book at a time, of course, when I'm working. But during the week, it might be on multiple books, depending on the stage that I'm at with each of them. So I have to be, for me, I need to be quite meticulous in my plotting. Not to say that I'm married to the plot. I'm always open to my characters leading me elsewhere. My subconscious, that would be taking me to a different ending or down a different avenue. But I do need to plot it, so I at least have the sense that I know where I'm going. Whether I'll end up where I thought I would end up, that depends on the book. I did with Never Coming Home. I did with the one for next year. I didn't necessarily for You Will Remember Me, last year's book. So it just depends, but definitely a plotter. And the more I write, the more I plot.
I think the most people that plotting kind of scares them is that I think they feel like that once you plot it out, when you outline it, that you are married to that outline and that you have
Yes, I've
to.
heard that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big misconceptions. But do you treat your outline uh, as sort of a living outline? And so if a moment of inspiration comes when you're writing chapter 4, and a character takes an unexpected turn that you didn't think was going to happen, and you start thinking, well, this is going to thinking about the fallout from that. Well, this is going to affect, how this character responds, and then, all of the implications of that. Then do you, how much editing does your outline go through during the drafting process, would you think?
I do edit it sometimes. So there have been cases where I've changed something early on where I thought that the plot that I'd written was the bee's knees and it was going to all work out. And then I start writing it and I think, oh, actually, maybe in chapter 4, this needs to happen. But then I'd have to go back and, like you said, what's the domino effect of that decision and what does it do to the other chapters? Sometimes I've written the book according to the outline, and it's during the editing process that I realize, there's something not working. I think I've got to move this or remove this or add this in. And then I probably won't go back and re-edit the plot because I've got the story to work with. I've got the whole manuscript to work with. So it doesn't make sense to go and adjust the plot to then rework the manuscript because I'm already doing that. It's for me, that would be a waste of time. So it really depends when I make the decision to shift a little. And if it's the ending, then it doesn't matter. I don't need to change the plot, because it's at the end. So who cares?
Sure.
So, yeah.
I'm always fascinated by the beginnings of a story because at one moment in time, never coming home does not exist in any form or fashion. It doesn't exist. And then either you start thinking about a character and then, this, you kind of start following this character in your mind and wondering what kind of trouble you can put her in, or maybe you've read a news article and it starts the what if game playing in your mind, and then you cast that what if game with characters that just appear, and whatever those elements are that begin to come together. Then Never Coming Home does exist, and it's your job as the writer to kind of dig that story out and pull it out of the ground and polish it up, and but it's sort of this magical moment of creation where this story is just born and just out of nothing. What usually is that first moment of inspiration for you?
So Never Coming Home was an anomaly because typically it's, as you mentioned, it's a news article, something I've read, something I've heard on the radio, generally from the news, except for The Neighbours. Actually, that was my first suspense novel where people move in next door, and that came from me standing at the bay window looking outside with 2 houses going up for sale on our courtyard in really quick succession, and me thinking, I wonder who's going to move in. Ooh, how complicated could this be? And it going, what if, going from there. But with
I was hoping you were going to say that there was a murder in your neighborhood.
No. No, thankfully not. Very quiet.
Thankfully
very
not.
Quiet in the burbs where I live. No. But no, that would be scary. I write crime fiction. I don't want to live it. Thank you.
Exactly. You write it so we don't have to live it, right?
Exactly. Yes. I scare myself with my books, and that's fine. But Never Coming Home was actually very much character driven. So I love movies and TV shows where you root for the bad guy or woman, knowing really that you shouldn't. And you start asking yourself, hang on a minute, why am I rooting for the bad guy or woman? I really shouldn't be, but I can't help myself. There's just something about this character that means I'm invested in them, even though they're doing really bad stuff. I almost want them to get away with it. In fact, I do want them to get away with it. So that was the genesis for Never Coming Home. I was thinking about these characters, and I thought that feels like a really interesting challenge, to write a character where I have to get the buy-in from the reader that they want to be in the bad person's head for the entire duration of a book and go on that journey with them. And there are two ways of doing that, really. Either you can make the character where people love to hate him or her. So I think of Kara Ruder's Best Day Ever, with one of the most glorious villains, Paul, who has decided it's going to be the best day ever because he's going to kill his wife. And you're in his mindset and he's just so awful. You just love to hate the guy. And you go along for the ride because you want to see his downfall. And I'm not going to tell listeners if there is one or not. I'm not telling. You'll have to get the book and read it. It's a great book. And then another way of doing that is to get the reader to actually like the character. So hate to love him rather than love to hate him or her, but him in terms of never coming home. And I chose that second route. So it was very deliberate. Lucas hires a hitman to get rid of his very, very wealthy but equally annoying wife. Hires a hitman on the dark web. It's a despicable act. It's terrible. He has his wife murdered. And yet I gave him a couple of techniques I used, I hope, so that not every reader will like him, but I hope the vast majority of writers will like him because he's funny, or I think he's funny. Depends if you like my sense of humor or not. But I thought he was really, really fun to write, because if you can disregard the fact that he hired a hitman on the dark web to get rid of his wife, he's actually really fun to hang out with. You'd actually probably enjoy going down the pub and having a drink with him because he's funny and charming. And he hides his true self really well. Plus I gave him a dog. So, I mean, he likes dogs. Come on, how can he not like the guy if he has this stray dog, which his wife wanted to have taken away by animal control? Come on, she's worse than him, surely. So there's little techniques like that I use that I hope he will be endearing. And also what I work very, very hard on is for readers to understand why Lucas and how Lucas becomes or became who he is at the beginning of the book. So his story, his backstory is unraveled slowly. So people can hopefully, if not agree with what he's done, understand it. Doesn't make it right, but they see where he's coming from. So he was a really, really interesting character to write. And my first book that was character driven rather than news article or a what if scenario.
So you mentioned that you really wanted this to be a character that people couldn't help but loving.
Yes.
Couldn't help but love, even though he at the core of the story, he's really doing a despicable thing.
Yes.
Does it come down to degrees of despicable? Do you love him because you hate her more? You know what I mean? Like
I do.
Like when you start kind of building out and let me ask it this way. Do you start building out these character traits as part of your outlining process, as part of your plotting? Do you start thinking of, what can I bring out in this character that's going to make him a likable, believable character, even though none of us would say that we like what he's doing?
Yes.
So, kind of what is the planning process for building those characters?
It really was a question of, okay, so if I'm going to spend as the writer the entire duration of the novel writing from the bad guy's perspective, I have to want to be in his perspective, because if I don't want to be in it, chances are the reader won't either.
Right.
So I was really, really conscious of, okay, what can I do to make him relatable, likable, and to have readers go along for the ride? So I spent an awful lot of time thinking about him. But Lucas, actually, he was very gracious in the sense that his character, his voice, came very, very early on in the process. Already from chapter 1, I had a good handle on his sense of humor, and he's wry, he's witty, he's sarcastic, and there's this inner monologue. The reader gets unfiltered access into the mind of a killer, but who also happens to be funny, which was fun to do. And I also gave my antagonist, Lucas, an antagonist. So there's somebody in the book who's worse than him, which I think was important. And we also, with my editor, we thought a lot about Michelle, about Lucas's wife, and made her perhaps not the nicest person. So when people are thinking, oh, well, yeah, he had her murdered, well, I might have too, you know, not seriously, obviously, but kind of empathy. Oh, yeah, she really is annoying. But of course, the reader gets Lucas's view of the world, because the entire book is from his perspective. So they also receive his interpretation of how Michelle is and what she does and what she's like and her kind of personality. So you also have to take that with a little bit of a, well, is she really that bad? Is he really telling the truth? Or he wants her money, so of course she's going to say she's despicable, you know. So
Right.
So there's a bit of playing in that as well. It really was a fun book to write. Lucas was a fun character, and I'd never written, that's not true, I had written from the bad person's point of view in You Will Remember Me, but the character wasn't funny. They, I can't give too much away who it was seriously messed up. And honestly, I wouldn't have wanted to write an entire book from their point of view, but from Lucas, I would happily write another one because he made me laugh so much. And I think because I wrote this one during the pandemic, and actually my mum also passed away in 2020, and I couldn't get to Switzerland to say goodbye because of the pandemic. It was just horrible. It was just horrible.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. But every day when I got up and I knew that I was going to disappear into never coming home, it gave me a place where I could wreak some havoc safely, where nobody gets hurt, and where I could laugh, because Lucas made me laugh. And that's why I think some people have been a bit surprised by Never Coming Home, because it's a lot funnier than my other books. It's dark, of course. I mean, the guy hires a hitman to kill his wife, so of course it is. You know, it is dark. We're dealing with dark themes, but he's funny. And when I wrote it, it probably came out funnier than it might have a few years before, because that was what I needed, because everything else seemed so bleak and desperate.
Right. And there's something about dark humor that can disarm a situation.
Yes.
It's really, and you know, this is a conversation for people trained in psychology, and I am definitely not that person. But there's something interesting that happens that a dark story that makes us nervously laugh at can really take the power out of kind of these big dark things that are going
Yes.
on in the world, that it really kind of steals the power from those big
It does.
things. It's really odd, but fascinating at the same time.
100% agree.
Yeah. You mentioned that that a lot of this came out of conversations that you had with your editor. When you first start publishing, you don't have the benefit of working with an editor from the beginning, because most of the time, you know, you're working on a manuscript that you are the only person in the world that knows anything about, you know, you and a handful of family members. And then, you know, when you get an agent and a publisher, and then that book comes out to the rest of the world, most of the work has been done by you and you alone. But then when you've signed on to a publisher and you have a contract, then that process changes a little bit, doesn't it? And there are other people involved in the process from the beginning. Could you talk a little bit about what the difference in that working relationship is from the newbie author who is doing this all on her own, and then bringing the finished product to someone, you know, that then will help you kind of whip it into shape and publish it, as opposed to what the process is like now when you have an editor and there are other people involved in the process from the beginning?
You know what, the thing that surprised me the most was when I got my first 2-book deal with HarperCollins. So that was for The Neighbours and what became Her Secret Son. So The Neighbours was a book that I'd worked on for a while. I'd edited it. I'd had beta readers read it. I hadn't hired a freelance editor, but my agent had read through it. So a lot of people, aside from my agent, who are not in the publishing industry had read it and had commented and given me feedback, and it was polished and repolished and deconstructed and put together and polished again. And so when my publisher said, we want to give you a 2-book deal, the first one is The Neighbours and the second one will be whatever it is that we decide together that it will be, I was panicking a little bit. But then we agreed on the concept for Her Secret Son. That came together relatively quickly. And I wrote the manuscript and I called my editor and I said, I am incredibly nervous to send you this manuscript. And she asked why. And I said, because nobody else has seen it. You're the only person who has seen this book, and I'm terrified. And she said, okay, 2 things. First of all, we gave you a 2-book deal because we know you can write. If we didn't think you could write, we wouldn't have bought The Neighbours. So relax on that one already, which was okay, great, but I'm still nervous. And then she said, don't forget that I don't expect Her Secret Son, the first version I see, to be as polished as the first version of The Neighbours that I saw. And that really gave me pause, because when you're trying to find an agent, and then when an agent is submitting your manuscript, it's the most most highly polished product you can possibly provide. But then once you have a publisher and stay with the same publishing house, it changes a little because they don't expect it to be to that level, which messed me up a little bit, to be honest. It was and it did help, but I'm still not the kind of person who will hand something in. I've only ever done it once. When I handed in You Will Remember Me, I called my editor and I said, I know there are problems with it. I like the story, but there's just something that's not right. It's not clicking, and I can't see what it is. And can you please help me? Which she did, and I love the end product. There was a lot of editing on that one, but with Never Coming Home and the one for next year, well, all of them actually, bar that one, I always try, even with You Will Remember Me, I really do the best I can to give them the most possible product that I possibly can, because that's just who I am. That's how I work. That's how I'm wired. I won't send something in if I feel that it's 3/4 of a job.
Yeah. Never Coming Home is, I think it's I know it's one of my favorite books that I've read so far this year. That I had so much that, it's odd to say that you have so much fun with a book that revolves around murder, and especially murder for hire.
Yes.
But this book is so much fun, and I know people are going to love it. It really scratches just a number of itches that I promise people out there. You may not even know that you have this itch, but when you start reading this book, I promise you're going to love it. Hannah, we're going to put links to it in the show notes where you can grab it in audiobook or physical paper if you want to hold that. But have you listened to any of the audiobook yet?
No, I've only heard a snippet, a very, very, maybe a 40-second clip of the first chapter. And I'm so excited to listen because the narrator, Alex Wyndham, he narrated Nate's chapters in The Neighbours. He narrated all of Her Secret Son, and he narrated The Man on the Beach's chapters in You Will Remember Me. So he's kind of my go-to guy. And we had a Zoom conversation actually. We touched base via Zoom just to chat about the book and the characters and whatnot. And I cannot wait. I honestly cannot wait to hear what he's done with the different characters, because his voice acting skills are just insane. He's also, incidentally, if anyone out there watches Yellow Jackets, the hit Crave, I think it was, TV series that was out late last year, with the all-female football team that crashes in the Canadian wilderness, and they have to survive for, I think, 18 months or however long it is out there. He plays a role in that. He's the detective in the present timeline, the detective Kevin. He plays an American detective. He's actually a Brit, so he does both voice acting and on camera. And the voices he does, honest to goodness, sometimes I'm listening and I'm thinking, hold on, is that actually still him, or did they get somebody else? Because he has such a range, and different accents, and I cannot wait. So I know when I wrote it, I already thought, okay, he has to narrate this. So I was already hearing him in my head, how he would narrate it, and it was already making me laugh. So I know there are some authors who don't listen to their audiobooks because they find it's uncomfortable. It weirds them out because it's their work, and then they spot the flaws. But I approach it from a slightly different angle. When I listen to my audiobooks, I see them very much as not my work anymore. It's the performance that I'm listening to, not the actual words that I wrote. And on the other side, yes, it's educational, because I will pick up on the things maybe that I repeat too often, phrases and stuff. I think, oh, you said that particular thing once too many. Don't do that in the next book. And I have a running list. I have a hit list of expressions or words that I overuse in my manuscripts, and then I'll add it to that and do a search in the latest manuscript and take them out. So it's really helpful too. But I cannot wait to hear what Alex has done with it. I just think he's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, me as well. It is one of my most anticipated audiobook releases, and we're recording this a couple of weeks before the book drops. And when you're hearing this, the book is already out, but we're recording this in the past, if you will, and the audiobook isn't quite ready yet. And I'm so kind of chomping at the bits because I love this book so much, and I just know that the audiobook performance is going to be just over the top, and I can't wait to
yes so, same. I can't wait.
So we'll put links where people can go grab the audiobook as well, if that's the way you prefer to consume books. But whatever format you choose, this will not be a disappointment. Hannah, always a pleasure to catch up. Tell people where they can find you online if they want to dig into all of the great stuff that you do.
Of course, with pleasure. So my website is hannahmarymckinnon.com. That's also my Instagram and Facebook. And on Twitter, I'm Hannah M. McKinnon. And of course, people can find me on First Chapter Fun, both on Facebook and Instagram as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Hannah, for coming on. And tell Hank hi for me, if you will.
Oh, I will, with pleasure. Yes, and thank you so much again for having me back. I think this is round 3.
Oh, something like that. Yeah. So we're just going to have a standing once a year.
Yeah. That sounds good to me. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah.